a second plane flew into the second tower of the World Trade Center.
The second building that was hit by the plane has just completely collapsed.
It collapsed. The top floors collapsed down.
My name's Doug Westhoff. I was a task force leader for Missouri Task Force 1 at the World Trade Center deployment. Ironically, I was at Fort Leonard Wood when the event took place. I was there working with some National Guard representatives to see how we could integrate National Guard resources into the National Urban Search and Rescue System. The events occurred right about 8 o'clock as the meeting was starting. We never even got the meeting started. People kind of aborted that mission and went on to whatever their pending issues were relative to the attacks.
My name's Kurt Doolady. I served as a rescue squad officer. On September the 11th, at that time of my life, I was employed by O'Reilly Auto Parts. I was doing outside sales for the auto parts store. And I was visiting actually with one of my customers who actually had a television on. And we saw the first plane impact the building. And started kind of watching the news a little bit. And then obviously the second plane impacted the tower. And so then at that point I excused myself from my daily business and came here to the warehouse assuming that we could be potentially activated.
My name is Dave Weber and I was a structure specialist. I was working in the office and I'm a structural engineer in private practice, and at some point in time a tenant in an adjacent office to our building called and he said, "Hey Dave, you have to come over here and see this." And so I walked over, didn't really know what he was talking about, and saw, wow, this plane hit the first tower. And shortly after, when we were talking about it, because they thought it might have been an accident or something like that, shortly after that, we watched the second plane hit, and it was obvious that it was purposeful at that point.
My name is Brian Gladney. I was the technical team manager for the World Trade Center deployment. September 11th is my birthday, and my wife at the time and I dropped off our son at 3rd grade, and she says, "What do you want to do for your birthday?" And I said, "Well, I have a bunch of task force stuff to do." We had the entire equipment cache opened up, doing a physical inventory. So every box off every pallet on the ground, opened up, verifying every item, because we were low on the deployment plan at that point. And this seemed like a good time to do that. And so even though it was my birthday, that was a lot of stuff that was left undone.
My name is Scott Olson. I was Assistant Fire Chief for the Boone County Fire District and a task force leader with Missouri Task Force 1. That day I was at the doctor's office actually having my knee looked at for an injury when Assistant Chief Jeff Scott called me and said that a plane had crashed into the World Trade Center. He didn't know whether it was a big plane or a small plane. He was just making me aware of the situation. He called me a little while later and said that it was a large plane and that I should turn on the news if I could go somewhere and see a TV and watch what was going on. So I went out into the reception area at Columbia Orthopedic Group and saw the television and realized what was going on, and went back in and told the receptionist that I had to leave and go back to the fire district headquarters.
So I went home, which I'm lucky because my house is fairly close to the office and I'm in town, which is very convenient. So I ran home and put all my task force stuff in a bag.
After I arrived here and helped start in preparing equipment, ran home, retrieved my deployment bags, and then I actually, my kids at that point were going to 2 Mile Elementary School. I actually called the school and had them get my kids on the phone and told them where I was going and that sort of stuff.
After I got back to fire district headquarters, FEMA called me, since I was the point of contact for the task force, and notified me that that the task force was going to be deployed. It was going to be officially deployed at noon that day.
Dropped off Sean at elementary school, and we came out here, and I started just working on the cache. I had no idea anything had happened until I walked in here, and then it was very obvious. I didn't see the video. I didn't see the video of the planes hitting until like 3 in the morning. But it was very clear that we needed to get going right away, and so that was the plan, was get this cache back together and get it out the door. Even though we hadn't been alerted, it seemed quite likely that we would be.
So from that point forward, we started to call other members of the task force, getting logistics personnel in to start packing up the USAR cache, and then also notifying people and rostering a team to deploy.
Got back in just a little before noon. Chief Olson was actually mobilizing the task force.
We were busy. Logistics team was here, everybody was here, and we were getting our work done, and we hadn't been activated yet. And then I remember Scott, who received the activation orders. He got us together, and it seemed like it was right around noon. And I remember it was over in the USAR warehouse, and he climbed up on some boxes or something and got us together and said, okay, this is real. We've received official activation orders, and this is now much bigger than us.
Do you remember Scott getting everyone in the bay and getting on a box and saying, all right, well, this isn't training, this is the real deal, and you're probably going to see things and feel things that you've never seen and felt before, and you need to be prepared for that because you've got to keep your head down and get the job done. And it was stark to me because I hadn't really thought about it.
And I thought it was quite memorable, and we just continued to do our thing from that point on, and he began to make the difficult choices on who was going to be deploying and who was not able to go.
We were still a young task force, and I was the training coordinator for the task force, so I knew the capabilities of all the personnel on the task force at that time, who had completed all the training, who was still in training. And so I made the decisions based upon what were the best, those that had the best qualifications at that particular point in time. It was difficult because obviously a lot of people did want to go. Actually, every member of the task force wanted to go, but we could only take, at that time, 62 personnel.
I think that was one of the hardest things, at least for me. My wife at the time had trained to be a canine handler, had a dog, was ready to go, had spent hours and hours on this, and we made the decision as a couple that both of us should not go. We have a child, and so someone had to stay back. That was the hardest thing for me, was that she wasn't going.
For all the people that we did deploy, there was another 60 to 100 people that came in to help. to get us on the road. We had packed up before for training exercises, but this was an entirely different deal. We were going by air, and packing for an airplane versus packing up in a truck are completely different. I got the phone call at noon, officially deploying Missouri Task Force 1 to New York, and we departed here a little bit before 6.
62 members were assembled with equipment. We moved from our assembly point here at headquarters to Whiteman Air Force Base.
That in itself was a very big event, as the first real deployment the task force had. So trying to get moving down the road and then coming to a military base that is now secured at a very high security alert, and trying to bring the team in and keep everybody organized and that sort of stuff, that was very interesting.
He made that trip to Whiteman under, uncertain security. We get to Whiteman, and of course things were very tight there. We all go through the security check, dogs check us all, check all of our stuff, we're all loaded up, and then we have to unload. There's some sort of security breach, they thought they saw somebody running along the flight line or something, and at this point we don't know. This is unprecedented stuff. We have no idea what might happen next, and is there another attack, and are they going to try to take out the responders? So we unload and we do all that, and we finally get on the plane and get in the air, and there are no other planes up there.
Once we took off, that we were the only aircraft flying in the country at that moment. So seeing the C-130s come in and then being escorted by fighter jets from Missouri all the way to New York was interesting, to say the least.
Flew military aircraft into New Jersey, into a joint base there in New Jersey.
At McGuire, where we landed, we got a talk from a young gentleman that was probably 19 years old, was an MP at McGuire Air Force Base, and said, if you get off the sidewalk, don't get off the sidewalk. If you leave your bag, we will take your bag and we will blow it up. And they were just in this, if you get off the sidewalk, we will draw down on you. They were just really tense and very hardcore.
We staged overnight and then went by ground into 9/11, into the World Trade Center site on the 12th.
On our way into New York, one of our members was from that area, and at that point he said, from right here, if the towers were standing, you would see them. And so, and to look in a general area, and all we could see was columns of smoke.
I remember sitting across from Dean Martin on the bus. Dean had grown up in the Bronx, and it really hit him hard.
That was one of the most surreal things I'd ever seen. You could see the column of smoke, you could see the Statue of Liberty, and the smoke was behind the Statue of Liberty. It was really weird. And it wasn't until then that I realized that, man, this is really crazy.
Once we arrived, we went to a central staging location, the Javits Center, and then from there awaited our tactical assignments.
First night, when we first got to the Javits Center and set up our base, you could hear F-16s going over. There were some serious individuals on the roof with some serious armament, because that's, we didn't know. Again, the secondary device sort of concept is that they come after the responders. And so if they did that to the Twin Towers, why wouldn't they take out a convention center full of us?
And so there, it's a huge, huge convention center, huge open floor space. And so all the teams were given a certain amount of floor space. And in there is where we stored equipment. We would also sleep, and we basically slept on the floor. there. So a sleeping bag, a sleeping pad, with, I think there was 8 or 10 other teams under that roof as well.
We were several miles north along the West Highway in Lower Manhattan, but we were a considerable distance away. To get in the first day, we had to move equipment in. We went by truck, we went by boat, we went by every mode of transportation that we could, and ultimately moved our equipment cache down to the Battery Park manager's office where we made our forward base of operation.
We got into Javits Center, and so for some reason I was with Mike Barker, me, Les Cruz, and a couple of other folks, Tech Info I think, and TFL. We went with Port Authority on a boat and jumped on there, grabbed our 24-hour pack, and they took us down to what was, I think, Battery Park, near where kind of had our forward base of operations. So we got off there, tried to establish where we were going to be. Just another little amazingly surreal thing is getting off the boat from the Port Authority and stepping down in Battery Park, which was a little postage stamp of grass, you know. It was like walking on the moon. You step off and every step you have was like poof, like dust. It was between 6 and 18 inches.
When we got in there, it was a 16-acre debris pile, essentially. We were assigned to the southwest corner, along with Pennsylvania. They essentially had 8 teams working. They put 2 on each side. We happened to be able to find a forward base of operation in Battery Park. We did area search in adjoining office buildings all around the south and the west side of Ground Zero. I worked day shift. Don Tomnitz was the task force leader that took night shift. We split our team in half, a 62-member team. We split them in half and maintained a 24-hour presence on the southwest corner of Ground Zero. I integrated with the incident support team ops chief, who was in contact with FDNY's ops personnel, and that's really where the mission tasking came from. So as missions would come in and they had a particular need on that southwest side, it would be a radio contact from the incident support team to myself. I would assign squads or components of the workforce that I had to deal with whatever that mission was, and that was really our management flow. Was from FDNY through the incident support team down to the task forces. We would affect whatever missions we were assigned, report that back up, and remain in a ready position. It was very much a support role for FDNY, assisting them, augmenting all of their efforts. This was a very unique situation for them, having to welcome in outsiders from all across the country.
I worked the night crew as a rescue squad officer. It was to move in that evening, and our assignments were to go look and search for live survivors. Coming in the dark, there were several obstacles, hazards that we had to be constantly aware of, and we referred to those as widowmakers. So as all the buildings collapsed and subsequently impacted surrounding buildings, steel beams, parts of buildings would be impacted into those other structures and were falling actively while we were walking on the ground. So you were constantly looking up to see if there was any overhead hazards that you needed to avoid, and simultaneously had to look down because there's more to New York than what you see on the surface.
My first assignment was the Marriott Hotel, which was smashed down to about the size of the Tiger Hotel from some 20-some stories, with debris hanging everywhere, things hanging out of large pieces of steel hanging out of the sides of 100-story office building kind of thing is just very unnerving. The size and the scope was very, very intimidating. The way that we handled that was that there were 8 teams in there and an incident support team that was in constant communications with FDNY's leadership, and they had specific missions.
You can't stand in that window and look out at that pile, particularly with that beam that was bent. I remember that very clearly. You can't stand there and look out that window and have it not get to you. That this is something.
To see the debris as a big picture was one thing. But then when you got closer and actually were working on a rubble pile, in there you would find personal effects. And that really put a human touch to that on the first night. As those searches continued and our shifts continued, it became even more emotional as far as with people.
Remember, as we came into Javits for the first time on the buses going down these city streets, lined with people with pictures of their family, friends, loved ones, and they were cheering for us because help was here.
They would line that street and they would have photos of their family members that were missing. And so they would literally crumble them up into a ball and throw them at you. And they would beg you to find this person. And that went on basically the whole time we were there. Every shift in, every shift out, you would go through this gauntlet of people.
The emotional components there, the realization that we were doing recoveries.
Man, when you realize the number of individuals and their families and the impact that had, and we need to get in here and do our thing and try to help. And that's, there's certain images that kind of stick with you. And
there wasn't a lot of heavy rescue types of things being done. It was a blend of water rescue. The subways had water in them. The lower levels of the trade center where the concrete wall had fractured and the river water was trying to seep through. We got involved in very unique missions as well. There was a piece of steel sticking out of a building on the west side that the slope was such that it could have slid out of the building that it was impaled in, and we had rescuers down below, another 20 stories down below, that were doing recoveries, trying to get into underneath fire trucks and that sort of thing. So our heavy rigging folks actually took cable up into that building and tied that piece of steel into the superstructure of that building to prevent that piece of steel from sliding out and creating further injury. We used our structural engineers to watch what we called as the 3 sisters, the 3 spires that were stuck into the debris pile on the west side where we were working. The question was, as we continued to lower the debris pile, were those affixed to something or were they just jammed in the debris, and as we lowered the debris pile with our delayering efforts, would those become unstable?
My job as the structure specialist is kind of a safety person. Specifically, some of the things I did was I helped monitor with, then it was a theodolite, we use a total station now, help monitor some of those flowers, which are the big column pieces that had fell from the towers. It was a big concern, when we were removing debris, are these flowers sufficiently supported? Are they going to fall on a worker or a rescuer? And so I spent quite a bit of time monitoring that.
Had they moved any more than a fraction of an inch, they could activate an evacuation signal and clear the grounds underneath that.
And also kind of evaluating pieces of the structure and pile that we were operating in, so everyone felt comfortable with where we were and where we shouldn't go. For example, there was a big walk bridge, pedestrian bridge by the Winter Garden that was kind of off its support a little bit. And so, you know, that's a great suggestion for me is, hey, let's not hang around down here. Let's not go here. Let's send the dogs and see if we get a hit. If we don't, let's stay away from that. Let's focus on other areas.
Looking down in debris piles and recognizing that that's a part of a fire truck, and I got people underneath that and trying to do recoveries.
I can remember when we first got there at the Southwest Sector, we were having difficulty working right at first because the FDNY, they had, you know, 4 sectors. We were in the Southwest Sector. The chief, FDNY chief of that sector, kind of controlled the operations there, and of course they were very obviously super emotional about, because it was their guys. There was a particular location near Winter Garden that they had sort of a command post, and it was by a fire truck. A lot of where we operated, we could see that fire truck, but it was very, very thin at that time. And so right at first, these guys just didn't want to let us work because they wanted to take care of their guys. And I just specifically remember a big breakthrough. I think this pile's very stable because of all this momentum locking this stuff in here. You know, I really think that we can get in here and get these guys out with some dignity, and then you can tear into it. And so we kind of went back and forth, and you know, Les was chiming in, and at some point the FDNY chief said, do what the yellow shirt guy says, let him go in there. And so at that point, and then thereafter, we were actively operating in that Southwest Sector. It was a pretty cool that it worked out that way.
Early on in the operation, when we found a firefighter, Missouri Task Force 1 folks communicated that to FDNY's personnel. We backed off and allowed FDNY to do the recovery of their own personnel. Over the 6 or 7 days that we were in there, integrated with FDNY folks, we became known as the Missouri guys in yellow, as we were wearing yellow Nomex shirts, easy to identify, and built such a rapport with those folks that ultimately by the end of the event, we were actually allowed to do some of those recoveries. It was a growing experience as we made lifetime friendships with those people, built some great relationships, and they trusted us, and that meant a lot.
My role back here was to support the families and ultimately to support the task force from a distance. I knew that they were under tremendous stress. I knew that they were seeing things, experiencing things that they will, had never experienced and probably never will again. But it was important for me to know that their loved ones back here were being taken care of, so all they needed to do was really focus on their job at the time. I communicated on a daily basis with Doug Westhoff, the task force leader, and other members of the task force to understand what was going on, to remind them that I was there for them, for their families, and if they were hearing from their families that there was assistance needed or whatever, that we would take care of that. And so initially, the next day after they left, we made contact with all the family members and set up a calling tree and also an email group to begin the process of keeping them apprised of what happened. And they would hear from me twice a day about what was going on, the inside story, not what they were seeing, in the newspaper or on TV, but the inside story of what the team was doing, what issues that they were facing, and then also how could we help them at home. Did they need their lawns mowed? Did they need somebody to go to the grocery store for them? Did they need somebody to pick up the kids from school?
2 technical team managers, now it's logistics managers. Dennis A. Holt was the other. I think I was supposed to be days and he was supposed to be nights, but we didn't stick to that. We were both up all the time. We would make sure that if one of us went to sleep for a couple hours, the other one was awake. Family support was a big deal. It was a big deal to those of us that were gone. It was a big deal to our families who were home. Scott and a number of folks back here were handling that. And it was comforting to us to know that that was being taken care of. We were able to make phone calls. I don't remember exactly, maybe not the first day or two, but after about day 2 or 3, things started to get into a pattern, and some logistical things were solved on the FEMA end, and we were able to make phone calls.
We knew that it was very important that the families stay in touch with their loved ones, obviously, that were operating in New York, and so we used our communications capability, primarily dealing with the technical team managers, Brian Gladney and Dennis Ahold, along with the communications team members, who was Carter Blumeyer and Jerry Jeffries, to create a variety of lines of communications into the members of the team from their family members.
We were trying to feed people, find places for them to sleep, make sure they had clean clothes, make sure they had showers, and try to coordinate all that with the 8 or 10 task forces that were all co-located at Javits. And then our comm guys, Jerry Jeffries and Carter Blumeyer, who could make rocks talk to each other, I'm confident, set up a repeater system on top of One Pin Plaza with an antenna and a repeater, and we were the first task force that was able to talk portable radio to portable radio from inside the Javits Center all the way to the pile, because of the magic those guys pulled off. So I didn't go down to Ground Zero for a couple of days, maybe 3 or 4 days, I don't remember anymore, but I felt like my role was to make sure the base was set up, not to go down and be a spectator. But I needed to see it, to see if there was something else we could figure out to support operations there, particularly once they started getting more and more search missions. We wanted to make sure logistics was doing our job. That was, I don't have words to describe that. I remember the spire that was sticking up, kind of a bent beam that we had a transit on that we were watching as a safety concern, and just the magnitude of it, you don't really appreciate it on TV.
While we were there, President George Bush did come in. I remember this very well. I was actually sleeping, and I was awoken by a dog. I thought it was one of our dogs, but no, it was a Secret Service dog. Once the dog woke me up and I figured out that the president was soon to arrive, of course, then we all got up and he made his way through the center. I actually had the opportunity when he came in, not only to meet him, but he actually had questions about our operation.
One of the more memorable parts of the whole thing to me was when President Bush came, and the day shift folks were at the pile working, and they weren't able to experience that.
While he was there, he was very presidential, but he also expressed his personal views as a person, not just the President of the United States, but as a citizen of the United States. And that was pretty emotional, to hear the President of the United States speak like a normal citizen would at that point.
You talk about real leadership at the right time. He shook every hand of every one of us that went through there, and he meant it. And Hillary Clinton was there, Governor Pataki was there, there were some other folks I don't remember, but he was very memorable to me because he was serious. He was going to fix this. And he sincerely appreciated what our teams were doing.
He was very down to earth. It was impressive, to say the least, almost overwhelming. very, very, very motivational for that. And words that he spoke there, later, I understood the meaning of the words he spoke that day.
That was more than meeting the president. It was meeting a leader who was leading at the time. I didn't know what he had said on the megaphone outside prior, you know, that got a lot of press coverage. I didn't know anything about that.
I can hear you, the rest of the world hears you, and the people who knocked these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
But he looked us in the face and he was sincere, and so we felt like there was going to be something done about this, whatever it was. That was one of the more memorable times.
Fire chief at the time, Steve Paulsell, along with the governor at the time, who was Roger Wilson, wanted to go out and visit, you know, provide some care packages and to talk and to express their appreciation for not only their appreciation, but the appreciation of all Missourians in terms of their service to their country. He had asked me to go, and I was appreciative that he did ask me to go, but at that point in time I was very involved with the families and felt that it would be inappropriate for me to up and now leave the families still at the very front end of this event. So I respectfully declined, but appreciated the opportunity to go out.
The return home part was probably the most emotional. I think probably fatigue was causing that as well. But we wanted to come home with the Missouri Air Guard. We loaded up our 3 C-130s and came home.
It was very emotional. I met them out at Whiteman Air Force Base, so we met them coming off the 3 C-130s from the Missouri Air Guard that brought them home. They were glad to be back, but they had clearly been impacted by this event.
When we were on the bus coming from Whiteman on I-70, and there was the overpass at Boonville, and there was hundreds of people on that overpass with signs, and I'm just like, why are all those people there, and why do they have signs like that? It didn't compute very well for me.
So the homecoming was a bus ride home. We put up flags along the roadway that leads into the fire district headquarters. We brought all the family members in. We brought certain dignitaries in that wanted to express their appreciation, and we wanted them to know that this was very important to us, that we show our appreciation to them.
It was emotional coming home. We were very, very tired, both physically and mentally. I remember coming into town, and there was lots of people waving flags, signs, things like that. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. That was really nice. Our convoy kind of took a detour because of all the people. So they ended up lining up an adjoining street, and probably a mile, 2 miles long, it was people, 20, 30 people deep. So now we're coming down Business Loop 70, headed west towards our headquarters. And there were literally thousands of people from the curb of the road, both sides of the road, 20, 30 people deep. Kids, parents, you know, all the community, people from other cities even came to greet us. And it was just shoulder to shoulder, all the way to our headquarters building. Our entire parking lot was full of people.
everybody was here. It was a big deal, you know. And then the hardest thing that had to happen was Doug had to give a speech. And I don't know how he kept it together. It was impressive because I was about to cry the whole time. And he kept it together, and Fire Chief said some things, and then we moved on to try to reintegrate into our families who, you know, hadn't been there for 10 days.
It was really hard for me to deal with personally, just in my brain, because I'm not big on pomp and circumstance, and I don't try to make myself a big deal. And it was very uncomfortable for me for people to say that, you know, you're a hero or you're something special, because I think that anybody that were there with our training would have done a great job. And so I just don't think I'm that special. And so it was really hard for me to just accept it.
To go home, that was interesting. You don't realize how much you miss, you know, your chair. You know, how comfortable that felt when you got home.
And getting home, my wife was pregnant with our second child. And so it was extremely emotional. And it was shocking to me because I just didn't realize how big of a deal it was. That event and how pivotal it was in our country at that time.
One of the things that really helps keep us going, obviously everyone on the team volunteers their time for this team, for the state of Missouri, for the United States. And so to know that the citizens from all of our communities where we all come from and the state of Missouri as a whole are concerned about our activities and what are we doing. And it adds an extra feeling of gratefulness that we're allowed to do this, that we're allowed to help where we can when we're called, and that we are representing all the citizens of Missouri, whether in the state of Missouri or outside the state of Missouri.
There were years of preparation prior to us joining the federal system.
In the early 90s, the fire chief at the time, Steve Paulsell, wanted to see if it was feasible for us to develop a task force here in Missouri under the auspices of the fire district. We had gone to several meetings across the country to learn, to listen, and to understand and realize that there was a need for more task forces in the central U.S. Most of them at the time were on the East Coast and the West Coast.
We started training programs through 94, 95, doing tiered Rescue Systems 1, Rescue Systems 2 classes, bringing instructors in from the outside.
Some of the stuff, the logistics, the planning piece, even some of the medical pieces, we had never trained on that, and nor did we have anybody that had experienced those types of environments. So we had to bring people in. And so all of that ultimately led up to exercises that we did at Camp Gruber in St. Louis to get the members of the team the experiences of actually going somewhere and having to actually set up a base of operations and live out somewhere on your own, while also during the day going through a variety of rescue drills and medical and rescue scenarios.
We had done so much preparatory work in the years in front of that and had already secured almost $500,000 of equipment through some state funding, again through some personal political relationships and those sorts of things that helped move this system along, that Missouri was actually selected as team number 26 because we scored highest in the evaluation.
This is probably the largest event that any of us had ever been to. At first, you wondered if you were trained enough, if you had enough training to even be there. And once we engaged, those thoughts went out.
It's both very cool and it was frustrating at the same time, because the skill sets that we had developed, breaching and breaking concrete and doing all that heavy rescue stuff, quite honestly, we really didn't employ at 9/11. What we thought we were going to be doing and what we actually engaged in varied a little bit. Yes, there was a cool element to it that we were able to use the skill sets that we had been trained in, the confidence that we had developed, but it was also a stark realization that you're going to have to adapt and overcome to whatever situation you're faced with, because you can't make a cookie cutter solution to national disasters. It just doesn't work that way. I think what we learned is we have to be flexible. That there is no, even though documents indicate that this would be the flow of the event, that's a static document, and we're working a dynamic event, and you have to be willing to adapt and overcome and flex with the uniqueness of whatever mission you're on.
What we figured out is it's not just about breaking concrete. It's about the search. It's about moving at a pace to be as productive but yet as thorough as possible. And so with that, things like equipment packaging, personal equipment packaging, things like that, that we discovered that maybe some boxes might be a little heavy. And so from that, obviously, we did some reconfiguration on packing. We did some more extensive training on rigging type stuff.
I think the biggest thing was constantly have to be getting better at preparing our personnel for the potential environments that they might experience and the different ways that we may have to deploy and then have to operate in and then have to come back. The other thing we realize is that we're going to work a lot with our National Guard partners. The National Guard plays a significant role in homeland disaster response. And so for many years, actually, we have partnered with the Missouri National Guard to do exercises, training and exercises and planning for these sorts of events. The impact on the fire district as it relates to the 9/11 deployment was that obviously we were losing a lot of our personnel, very active personnel in the fire district. But very quickly, after it was known that we were deploying, fire departments from actually all over the state called us and offered personnel and equipment to come staff our stations. And we took advantage of that to a certain degree. Departments within Boone County, Columbia Fire Department, Southern Boone County Fire District, Centralia Fire Department offered to respond to calls immediately so that we could concentrate on mobilizing and then deploying the team.
Really, some of my takeaways from September the 11th was the personal side of things. It made you think about your own life. So think about all those people that perished.
For me, the toughest part was going back home and trying to be normal again. Because to me, my normal is these crises in the office, right? Well, then it's the new normal. You get used to the new normal, and you're in this culture, and you're cranking, and everything's going the way it should. And then coming back home, now I have to say, how do I feel about watching somebody kind of mentally break down? Could that have been me? Maybe I got lucky.
You know, the emotional components are on a spectrum everywhere from here at home. I left a wife and 3 elementary age kids. We flew in a military aircraft when there was nobody in the air except fighter aircraft off our wings. We weren't really sure what we were getting into.
Well, I pretty well had it put away. And then we uncork it once a year on, on 9/11, and that's appropriate, and we should never forget. We must not forget. We must understand why this happened, how it could happen again, the sacrifice that all those families made, the people that were killed in that, both workers and, people at their place of work in the towers, as well as the rescuers.
In every one of these deployments, and I've been on several now, there's a unique bond that occurs between the people that go out the door. Because the reality is, I will never take that exact package out the door again. The team that you take out the door is always unique, and you always have a bond with those people that can never be broken. We look back at those 62 people. Some of those folks aren't with us anymore. We're concerned about long-term health, the effects of the products there at 9/11.
I think for me it was a very proud moment to see all that training, all that preparation, all that hard work. And it was hours and hours and hours of training and work to put this whole program together, to see it finally come to fruition in the terms of a major national response. It really made me feel very proud to be a part of this organization, to be part of the task force, and to be part of this group of people that have dedicated so much of their life